When rappelling, one mistake can be your last. Today we will learn how to avoid deadly mistakes while rappelling and how to be safe in the mountains. Hey guys, welcome to the high ground. My name is Fabio and today we're talking about risks that are inherently in rappelling. A few words on my background. I was in the Swiss mountain guide course, got sidelined by an injury. Now I'm getting right now back into it. And I like to share my experiences of roughly 200 days per year in the mountains over the last 20 years. Today we are talking about rappelling out in nature. We are not talking about rappelling off buildings or off a container while boarding a ship. This is not the topic of this video, although there might of course be a certain overlap. We will cover 4 specific topics. One is equipment failure, one is human error, and then we will go more into objective hazards like rockfall and in the winter avalanches. Equipment failure can result from mostly 2 factors. Either it's wear and tear on the equipment or misuse of the equipment. A classic example for this would be that a harness fails, which actually happened to quite famous climbers, I think on technical climbs. But it can also be, for example, that a rope fails because it is rubbing over a very sharp edge. Now, as you can already see, the rope rubbing over a sharp edge is actually a human error. Any rope will break if you rub it over a sharp edge long enough. So this is really something that we will have to discuss in the second point, in the human error. But let's talk about wear and tear that is due to the constant use of your equipment. Now we all know it. Every piece of climbing gear has a certain lifespan that is put out there by the manufacturer. And in these times, especially the soft gear like slings, harnesses, etc., have even indicators to show if there was a lot of abrasion, for example, on the belay loop, etc. Now, I admit myself, I just got my climbing harness out of the gear shed last weekend, and I was looking at it and I was like, oh damn, it's already 6 years old, right? I mean, it's my favorite climbing harness. I wore it a ton outdoors, and actually I should replace it because all the UV radiation from the sun, etc., that just weakens the fabric the climbing harness is made of, and at a certain point you should replace it. Then digging deeper into my shed, I had climbing harnesses that were 12, 13 years old, and I don't wear them at all, right? So it happens quite quickly that you have a really loved piece of gear, you wear it all the time, but it gets really, really old and you should replace it. The second part is not only looking at the shelf life of the gear, right, or the lifespan of the gear, but also making sure that the gear is actually meant for what you're doing. We had a few years ago accidents in Switzerland, and I'm not saying that the gear wasn't meant for that, but just for you as an example what to think about. We had accidents in Switzerland with ropes going over sharp edges during the mountain guide training courses because there were several people hanging on one rope. Of course, if you want to lower a guest efficiently, then you put 2 guests on one rope and that should hold up. But you should keep in mind what it actually means if you have, instead of 80 kilogram, suddenly 160, 170 kilogram hanging off that rope, and how it will affect the equipment you're using. And the last thing for the equipment failures is the belay. So you should always make sure that the belay is solid. There is this saying, your belay must not fail. So if you feel that the belay is somehow sketchy, then back it up. Don't put your life on the line just because you want to save a little bit of cordage, or you don't want to leave a sling behind, or even a camming device, right? A nuts, etc. It's just not worth it. So make always sure that your belay is super solid. Now, to summarize it, to avoid gear failure, use it in the proper intended way, so also with the intended weight. Inspect it before you go out, and make sure that you keep the shelf life of the gear in mind. The second group of deadly mistakes we see are human failures. They typically can occur due to a lack of experience. Fatigue is a big thing, adrenaline, or if you get too comfortable with what you're actually doing. So a certain type of hubris. The classics we are thinking about is rappelling off the end of a rope, because we know the rappelling route and we know that the rope will be sufficient to go down to the ground. Well, it doesn't, and then you fall off the rope. Stuff like this that goes a little bit more into the hubris. But I also want to tell you a story about adrenaline. And I was ice climbing, and I was leading the pitch, and it was not a necessarily hard pitch. And suddenly I have an idea why it happened. My foot popped off, and I was hanging into my ice tools, wanted to regain the foot, and at that point the whole ice plate I was on was coming off the wall. So I was flying down, hit myself in the face with an ice tool, and then I was hanging in the rope. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't too bad, nothing bad happened. But of course, everybody who climbs ice knows you don't want to fall when you climb ice, right? And I think that was only the second fall I ever took on an ice climbing route, so I was pretty shaken. Nonetheless, I swung over to my buddy who was on the belay, and then more or less on the same level, took his ice tools, finished the pitch, built the belay, got him up, and then we decided to rappel off the route because I really didn't want to continue climbing. And all was good. We were on the belay, we were talking, and then we started rappelling off, and he was going first, I was going second, because that's generally the safer place to be. And we rappelled down, and when we were down, I noticed that all the time while rappelling, I actually didn't close my screw lock carabiner. I just didn't close it. I don't know why. Normally it's automatic. As soon as I put a screw lock carabiner onto something, I automatically close it because it is so ingrained. But in that situation, due to the adrenaline, I started making mistakes, right? And we didn't do a good job to really account for me being in this, well, fight or flight state with adrenaline in my veins. So that's an example how you can actually make a mistake even after something happened that you would find to be the actual risk. Of course, if you're fatigued, if you're out on a really long climb, you have to rappel into the night. It's always bad because you don't see stuff really well, even though if you have a headlamp, it's just not the same. So these are all things where you have to really be really careful. Now, what can you do about that? Well, on one hand, if you're out on a sunny day, just always keep in mind that this is a dangerous activity. Don't become complacent. Make sure that you have systems, like always tying a knot at the end of the rope and then stick with the systems. For the other parts, really, if something extraordinary happened, then try to put in an additional level of safety. For example, before rappelling down, start making partner checks, right? You can both be already attached to the rope with your rappelling setup before before the first person goes down. That's a possibility. It's not as convenient for the second one because he might get rugged left and right when the first guy swings around. But it's really a possibility, and then you can make partner checks. Just make sure that everything is set up properly. The third risk I'd like to talk about to you is one of the more objective hazards, and that's rockfall. And rockfall, of course, can happen due to various reasons. Now with the warmer temperatures in the mountains, the basically melting permafrost, we see a lot of rockfall in the Alps, also bigger rockfall. But it's also sometimes due to inexperience of the people rappelling on top of you because they kick off rocks, etc. So, well, what can you do against that? Against the rockfall that is caused by permafrost, you can hardly do anything. I think just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, in the Mont Blanc range, a climber died because he was just hit by rockfall caused by melting permafrost. So you don't have chance there. Besides trying to estimate if the route really has that hazard or not, but you really can't see into the rock, right? With the rockfall that is triggered by people above you, you also can't do a lot against that because it's not a good idea as the first person going down to start kicking off rock and cleaning stuff because you don't know if people are below you, right? So that's not an option. But yeah, just instruct the people above you to really be careful. And of course, if you're the second to rappel down somewhere, also be careful. Never intentionally kick off rocks somewhere. They can go very, very far. And yeah, of course, I mean, we all wear helmets, but if you're hit by a 50-pound rock, then the helmet won't help you at all. So, I mean, yeah, but still wear one. And the last objective hazard I'd like to talk about to you are avalanches. Now, we generally don't associate avalanches and rappelling accidents because we see rappelling more with rock climbing, but especially on steeper mountain routes. Avalanches are actually something to consider. This is even more true in winter when ice climbing. Some ice climbs in Switzerland are notorious for their avalanche-prone slopes above them, so you can only go ice climbing when you have really good avalanche conditions. But it is also true in the summer because even in the summer in the high mountains there can still be snow, fresh snow, right? That changes the avalanche danger. And since we're generally rappelling in steeper areas, if the wall is super steep, then the snow is likely not sticking to it. But just the way how these sections generally are is that you have a steep section you're rappelling down, and there is something on top of it. And if that one hits you, then you have a real issue. What can you do there? Well, assuming your anchor will hold up, then the best thing you can do is to have a backup. So even in case that you would go unconscious, that you're still tied to the rope, like Prusik, etc. And of course, the other thing is just make sure that you check the avalanche reports, the predictions, if there will be avalanches before you go out in anything that yeah, might have avalanche hazard. Okay, so those were the 4 main reasons for rappelling accidents and rappelling deaths according to the current statistics I looked into. The equipment failure and human error are by far the biggest one. Then with a little bit of distance, we have the rockfall, and further down the line, we have the avalanches. Anything else is almost not existent. There are a few deaths because of medical conditions, etc. But those were the big topics. Now, as we saw, you can avoid them almost all of them, right? Unless you're unlucky. If you stick to a system, make sure that you keep in mind that the activity you're doing is dangerous and with good planning. I hope you found this video helpful. I thought it would be worth to really talk about the risk side of rappelling. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Remember to follow the channel. Check out the other videos I did about rappelling, a big guide on how to rappel, and also about how to rappel improvised or in an emergency. I really appreciate the time you spent watching this video. Thank you very much for that, and I'll see you next time.